When I returned from a grueling 2-month business trip in Europe, exhausted, and just wanting to pick up my dog from my parents' house, I walked into a cloud of cigar smoke and a smirk that would permanently destroy my family. My father took a long drag and casually announced he had sold my house to fund my golden child sister Chloe's luxury honeymoon with her arrogant new husband Trent. He laughed and said my house paid for their fun. I just smiled back. When he yelled asking why I was so calm, I told him the devastating truth about the property he had just illegally sold. Before I dive into the chaos, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to watch toxic family entitlement completely blow up in their faces. The heavy oak front door of my parents' house in Atlanta swung open with a familiar creak. After 8 weeks of living out of a suitcase auditing corporate mergers across London and Frankfurt, I was physically and emotionally drained. I am 34 years old, an auditor specializing in mergers and acquisitions, and all I wanted was to pick up my golden retriever Buster Sleep for 2 days straight, and finally go back to my own quiet house. I dragged my suitcase into the grand foyer, dropping my keys onto the marble console table. The house smelled faintly of expensive vanilla candles and stale tobacco. I walked toward the living room, expecting to find my mother Helen watching television or fussing over some new antique she had purchased. Instead, I found my father Marcus sitting in his custom leather recliner. He was nursing a glass of dark amber scotch and puffing on a thick Cuban cigar. He did not look like a man happy to see his eldest daughter return safely from overseas. He looked like a man who had just pulled off the scam of the century. "Glad you are finally back, Maya," he said, leaning back and crossing one ankle over his knee. He blew a thick ring of gray smoke toward the vaulted ceiling. "We need to talk about your living arrangements moving forward." I froze halfway across the room. My exhaustion briefly gave way to immediate suspicion. My father never initiated casual conversations about my life unless he wanted something or had already done something unforgivable. I set my purse down on the coffee table, keeping my voice perfectly level. "My living arrangements are fine, Dad. I am picking up Buster and driving back to my house. I have a mountain of jet lag to sleep off, and I need to be in my own bed." Marcus let out a low, rumbling laugh that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He took another slow sip of his scotch. The ice clinked against the crystal glass, sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "That is the thing," he said, his lips curving into a smug, self-satisfied grin. "You cannot go back to that house, Maya. I sold it last week." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a fraction of a second, my brain refused to process the sentence. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline of a terrible joke, but Marcus just sat there, radiating arrogant confidence. "You sold my house," I repeated. The words felt foreign on my tongue. "The 4-bedroom property I bought with my own money. The house I spent 3 years renovating. That house." He waved his hand dismissively, ash falling onto the Persian rug. "Do not be so dramatic. You are a single woman who works 80 hours a week. You are never even there. It was a massive waste of space and money. Chloe needed it more than you did." Hearing my younger sister's name felt like a physical blow. Chloe was 24 years old, the undisputed golden child of the family. While I worked my way through college and built a demanding career in finance, Chloe had spent her life coasting on my parents' credit cards and batting her eyelashes to avoid responsibility. A month ago, she had married Trent, an arrogant 28-year-old whose father owned a prominent real estate firm. Trent came from old money, and my parents treated him like royalty, desperate to secure their place in his wealthy white family circle. "What does Chloe have to do with my property?" I demanded, stepping closer to his chair. "Trent and Chloe wanted a proper honeymoon," he explained casually, as if discussing the weather. 3 months traveling through the Maldives, Paris, and the Amalfi Coast. Trent's father cut him off temporarily because of some ridiculous business disagreement. So your mother and I had to step up to protect the family image. We could not let her new in-laws think we were broke. Your house paid for their fun, Maya. It was the least you could do for your sister." My chest tightened as the sheer audacity of his confession washed over me. He had not just invaded my privacy. He had stolen my largest financial asset to fund a luxurious vacation for a grown woman and her entitled husband simply to keep up appearances. He sat there expecting me to scream, to cry, to beg for answers. He thrived on breaking me down, on reminding me that my hard work would always be sacrificed to pave the way for Chloe's comfort. I felt the familiar burning sensation of anger rising in my throat, but years of corporate auditing had taught me something crucial. Emotion is a liability when you are holding all the winning cards. You do not react to a bad deal, you systematically dismantle it. Instead of shouting, I let out a soft, genuine laugh. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and smiled right back at my toxic family. My father stared at my smiling face, and his satisfaction faltered. He leaned forward, gripping his glass of scotch tight enough to turn his knuckles white. I asked him a simple question. How did you manage to sell a property holding only my name on the deed? You cannot walk into a bank and sign away a house you do not own, Marcus. Real estate deals require identification signatures and notary approvals. The sound of heels clicking against the hardwood echoed. My mother Helen strolled in carrying a silver tray with a fresh pot of coffee. She wore a crisp white blouse and a string of pearls that probably cost more than my first car. She set the tray down and offered me a condescending smile. We did not need your physical signature, Maya, she said. You gave us the authority to handle your affairs a long time ago. You just forgot about it because you are always too busy working to pay attention to your own family. I crossed my arms. I have never given either of you financial authority over my assets. I have managed my own accounts since I was 18 years old. Helen poured herself a cup of coffee. 5 years ago, she reminded me, taking a slow sip. You had that emergency appendectomy. You were in pain and the doctors needed someone to make decisions if things went wrong. Do you remember that, Maya? You signed a power of attorney giving your father legal control in case you were incapacitated. The memory hit me. I was 29, rushed into the emergency room, with a ruptured appendix burning with fever and barely conscious. Hospital staff handed me a clipboard with emergency consent forms. My parents had been hovering, shoving a pen into my hand, insisting I needed to sign a medical power of attorney just to be safe. I signed it, blindly trusting them to act in my best interest while I was sedated on an operating table. That was a medical power of attorney, I said, keeping my voice dangerously steady. It was meant to allow you to make healthcare decisions while I was under anesthesia. It automatically revoked the moment I was discharged with a clean bill of health. Marcus laughed. You always skim the paperwork, Maya. That is a terrible habit for an auditor. Your mother and I had our family lawyer draft that specific document before we brought it to your hospital room. It was not a standard medical release. It was a durable general power of attorney. It gave me full executive control over your medical, financial, and legal decisions indefinitely. And you never revoked it in writing. I stared at them, marveling at their premeditated deceit. They had weaponized my medical emergency, using my physical pain as a tool to gain control over my future assets. They held on to that document for half a decade, waiting for the perfect moment to exploit it. You used a 5-year-old emergency document to bypass a title company, I asked, maintaining my calm facade. We presented the document to the closing agent, Helen explained. We said you were out of the country on a business trip and had authorized your father to liquidate the asset to help your sister. Since the document was legally notarized and never officially voided, the title company accepted it without question. We handled everything legally, Maya. You should be thanking us for taking the administrative burden off your plate while you were traveling. And who exactly bought this house, I asked. No legitimate buyer on the open market would purchase a home through an outdated third-party power of attorney without demanding to speak directly to the property owner first. Marcus puffed on his cigar, blowing smoke in my direction. We kept it in the family, of course. Trent recently established a real estate investment LLC. He needed a starter property for his corporate portfolio, and your house was sitting empty. It was a win for everyone. Trent got a great deal on a property he can flip, and Chloe got the honeymoon she deserves. You sold my house to your arrogant son-in-law, I clarified, watching Marcus nod proudly. You bypassed my consent, used a deceptive legal document, and transferred my primary financial asset to Trent's shell company just so he could fund a vacation. Helen frowned, annoyed by my lack of gratitude. Stop calling it a vacation, Maya. It is a European honeymoon. Chloe is marrying into a very prominent family, and we needed to ensure she entered that marriage with the appropriate lifestyle. You have always been selfish with your money. We merely reallocated family resources to where they were most needed. You can easily buy another house with your corporate salary. Chloe does not have those opportunities. The sheer audacity of her logic was breathtaking. They had orchestrated an elaborate real estate heist justifying their felony fraud under the guise of parental duty. They believed their actions were untouchable, viewing my accomplishments as communal property, ready to be harvested whenever the golden child demanded a new toy. I looked down at my phone. The screen illuminated my inbox, where 3 specific emails were waiting for my final review. I looked up at my parents. My smile widened into something sharp and unyielding. "You think you outsmarted me?" I asked softly. "You think you found a legal loophole to steal my property and hand it over to Trent without any consequences?" Marcus leaned forward, placing his cigar in a crystal ashtray. His expression darkened, irritated that his victory speech was not breaking my spirit. "There are no consequences," he growled. "The paperwork is signed. The deed is transferred. The money is already spent. You cannot undo it, Maya. You lost. Accept it and move on." "I did not lose, Marcus," I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "But you just handed Trent a ticking time bomb." Before Marcus could formulate a response to my warning, heavy footsteps echoed on the grand wooden staircase behind me. I turned slowly and watched Chloe and Trent descend into the living room, like royalty greeting their loyal subjects. They looked like a walking advertisement for stolen wealth. Chloe wore a pristine white Chanel sundress, holding a brand new Birkin bag that perfectly matched her expensive salon blowout. Trent walked beside her, projecting the effortless arrogance of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his 28 years of life. He wore a crisp linen suit and a luxury watch that caught the afternoon light. "Oh, good, you are home," Chloe chirped, descending the final step. Her tone was unnervingly cheerful, completely devoid of guilt. "I was hoping we would catch you before we left for the airport. Our flight to Paris boards in 5 hours, and I wanted to say thank you properly." "Thank you," I repeated, my voice sharp. "You are thanking me for a house you stole." Chloe rolled her eyes, dropping her designer bag onto an armchair. "Do not use ugly words like stole, Maya. It makes you sound bitter. Dad handled the transaction, and we needed the liquid cash to establish our new life. You know how Trent's family is. They expect a certain standard of living, and my wedding registry barely covered the essentials. You have a great job. You can just buy another house. This is about family priority." Trent stepped forward, placing a protective arm around Chloe's waist. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and mild irritation, the kind of expression someone reserves for an unruly employee. "Let us keep our voices down, Maya," he said smoothly. "There is no need for all this hostile energy. We are all adults here. Just take a deep breath and look at this logically." I stared at this mediocre man standing in my parents' living room, commanding me to lower my voice, while wearing a suit paid for by my stolen equity. The absolute audacity of his white savior complex was suffocating. He actually believed he was the voice of reason, managing a hysterical black woman who simply did not understand how the real world operated. "I am perfectly calm, Trent," I replied, holding his gaze. "But I would love to hear your logical explanation for purchasing a house from a man who did not own it." Trent chuckled, a condescending sound that grated against my eardrums. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Honestly, Maya, you should be thanking me. That house was way too much property for you. You are a single woman completely consumed by your corporate auditing job. What does a single workaholic need with a 4-bedroom house in a premium family neighborhood? You do not entertain. You do not have children. The property was just sitting there deteriorating while you traveled the globe chasing promotions. It was a terrible allocation of resources." I listened to him reduce my hard-earned achievements to a sad, lonely existence. In his mind, my success was a flaw. My independence was a defect that needed to be corrected by a man who knew better. I stepped in and did Marcus a massive favor. Trent continued confidently. Your father needed cash fast to cover the honeymoon and a few of his own business expenses. Real estate transactions take months on the open market. I offered him a direct, immediate solution. I created an LLC, transferred the funds within 48 hours, and took the burden off your hands. It was a clean family business deal. And how much exactly did you pay for this favor, Trent? I asked, tilting my head. $300,000, he bragged proudly. Cash. My house was appraised at $1.2 million last quarter, I stated, letting the massive discrepancy hang heavily in the tense room. You paid $300,000 for a $1.2 million estate, and you want me to believe this was an act of familial charity. Trent crossed his arms, looking highly satisfied with his negotiation skills. Market value is subjective, Maya. The true value of a property is whatever a buyer is willing to pay in cash on the day the seller is desperate. Marcus needed liquid capital immediately. I had the capital. I took on the risk of buying it as is without an inspection period to help the family out. You get to walk away without the burden of property taxes and maintenance. I get a solid asset for my portfolio. It is called business. Chloe chimed in, nodding vigorously. Exactly. Trent sacrificed his own investment capital to help us. You should be grateful we kept the house in the family instead of letting Dad sell it to some random stranger. Grateful, I echoed. You forged my consent, committed felony fraud, and sold my $1 million home for pocket change to fund your vacation, and you expect my gratitude. Trent sighed heavily, acting burdened by my refusal to accept his generosity. You are being entirely too emotional about this, Maya. This is exactly why women like you struggle to build real wealth. You get attached to bricks and wood instead of seeing the bigger financial picture. I bought the house fair and square. The deed is officially in the name of my company. The money is in Marcus' account. It is a done deal. We are flying to Paris tonight, and when we get back, I am going to tear that house down and build luxury condos. I looked at Trent, soaking in his overwhelming sense of entitlement. He stood there firmly, believing his privilege made him invincible. He believed his gender, race, and family money gave him the absolute right to plunder my life without facing a consequence. He thought he had outsmarted a corporate auditor. His massive ego would not allow him to see me as a threat. I did not scream. I did not throw the expensive crystal ashtray sitting on the coffee table. I did not fall to my knees and weep about the betrayal of my own flesh and blood. Instead, I turned my back on Trent and his smug little monologue. I walked slowly past my father and my mother. My heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor. The sound was steady and deliberate. I headed straight for the massive marble kitchen island that anchored the open concept space. I opened the glass cabinet and retrieved a tall tumbler. I walked over to the refrigerator dispenser and pressed the glass against the lever. The sound of crushed ice tumbling into the glass broke the suffocating silence in the room. Water filled the tumbler to the brim. I took my time. I let the cold condensation form on the outside of the glass. I turned around and leaned back against the cool marble of the kitchen counter. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my ice water. I watched them. I just watched them stand there in their designer clothes, paid for with my stolen equity. I let the silence stretch out and wrap its heavy arms around their necks. In the high-stakes world of corporate mergers and acquisitions, you learn very quickly that silence is a weapon. The first person to break a silence is usually the person who is bleeding power. I had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars with ruthless executives who would eat Trent for breakfast. I knew how to hold a room hostage without saying a single word. Chloe shifted uncomfortably, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She adjusted the strap of her Birkin bag, looking nervously at our mother. Helen frowned deeply, her pearl necklace suddenly looking a bit too tight around her throat. They had anticipated a meltdown. They had prepared for tears and shouting. They had mentally rehearsed all the ways they would dismiss my anger as hysterical and unreasonable. My absolute composure was terrifying to them because it was entirely off script. Trent attempted to maintain his facade of superiority. He shoved his hands into his tailored pockets and scoffed. He looked around the room as if seeking applause for his magnificent handling of the situation. Look at her, he muttered to Marcus. She is completely in shock. She does not even know how to process the fact that she has been outplayed. Give her a minute. The reality will sink in soon enough. But Marcus knew better. Marcus had raised me. He had watched me study late into the night while Chloe was out partying. He had seen me map out my 5-year plans. He had watched me climb the corporate ladder in an industry dominated by men who looked exactly like Trent. He knew my silence was never an indicator of shock. It was an indicator of calculation. Marcus stood up from his leather recliner. The ice in his Scotch glass rattled as his hand began to tremble slightly. He took a heavy step toward the kitchen island. His face turned a dark shade of crimson. The vein in his neck pulsed with a sudden rush of adrenaline. He slapped his thick hand down hard onto the polished wood of the coffee table. The loud smack echoed through the entire house, startling Chloe so badly she dropped her keys. "Why are you so calm?" Marcus shouted, his voice booming with forced authority. "Stop looking at us like that, Maya. Stop smiling. You should be packing your things and figuring out where you are going to live. You should be asking us for a loan. You should be begging Trent for a few weeks to move your belongings out before he brings the bulldozers. Why are you just standing there smiling at me like a psycho?" I took another sip of my water, enjoying the crisp, cold sensation sliding down my throat. I lowered the glass and let my gaze sweep over each of them. I looked at Helen, who had enabled this entire disaster because she wanted to brag to her church friends about her wealthy white son-in-law. I looked at Chloe, who felt entitled to the fruits of my labor simply because she existed. I looked at Trent, who genuinely believed his trust fund made him the smartest man in the room. Finally, I locked eyes with Marcus the patriarch, who sold out his own daughter to save a failing logistics company. "You are sweating, Dad," I said softly. My voice was calm and steady. It cut through his shouting like a scalpel. "You have your cigar and your scotch. You have the money from the sale safely deposited in your business accounts. Chloe has her tickets to Paris. Trent has the deed to $1 million property. You executed the perfect family heist. You should be celebrating. So why are you sweating?" Marcus wiped a bead of perspiration from his forehead. He opened his mouth to yell again, but the words died in his throat. He looked at Trent, and then back to me. The panic was slowly starting to set in behind his eyes. He realized that my calmness was not shock or denial. It was the absolute confidence of an apex predator who had just locked the cage from the inside. I set the glass down on the counter with a soft thud. Trent stepped forward, his chest puffed out defensively. He hated that I was ignoring his authority. He hated that his grand speech had failed to break me. He pointed a manicured finger at my face. "You are crazy," he sneered. "You are completely unhinged, Maya. We are leaving for our flight, and tomorrow morning I am sending my contractors to rip that house to the ground." I smiled, letting the sweet anticipation of his impending ruin wash over me. I finally broke my silence to address them all. I looked right past Trent and focused entirely on the man sweating in his leather chair. "You see, Marcus, I am an auditor for corporate mergers and acquisitions. My entire career is built on following the money. I track hidden liabilities. I expose fraudulent financial statements. I find the rot that desperate men try to bury under layers of fake spreadsheets. Did you really think you could hide a collapsing logistics empire from your own daughter?" Marcus flinched. Helen gripped the edge of the sofa, her knuckles turning white. "What are you talking about, Maya?" she demanded. "Your father's company is expanding. We just signed a major regional contract." I let out a harsh laugh. "Expanding. That is what he told you, Helen. He told you the business was booming so you could keep buying pearl necklaces and hosting country club dinners. But that is not the reality. The reality is that Marcus Logistics has been bleeding cash for 3 years. You lost your 2 biggest commercial freight contracts last quarter. Your fuel suppliers are threatening to cut you off because you are 90 days behind on payments. Your payroll checks almost bounced twice last month." "That is a lie!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. He stood up again, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You do not know anything about my company. You are making things up to deflect from the fact that you lost your house." I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim blue folder. I did not open it. I just held it up for them to see. "I know everything, Marcus. I know that you are secretly drowning in $4 million of corporate debt. I know that the bank issued a final warning notice 2 weeks ago. You were facing total liquidation. You were terrified of losing this mansion, of losing your status in the community, of having to tell your country club friends that you were a catastrophic failure. Chloe scoffed, crossing her arms over her expensive white dress. You are insane, Maya. Dad would never lie to us about the business. You are just jealous because Trent stepped in to help the family while you were off gallivanting around Europe. I turned my gaze to my sister. Oh, Chloe, you sweet, naive girl. You actually believe this was all about your honeymoon. You think Daddy sold my house just to make sure you could sip champagne in Paris? Wake up. Your honeymoon was nothing but a convenient cover story, a smokescreen to hide the real transaction. I turned back to Trent, who was now shifting uncomfortably on his feet. The smug smile had vanished from his face, replaced by a tight grimace of irritation. Trent did not buy my house for $300,000 to do us a favor. Trent bought my house at a massive discount because it was part of a much larger backroom deal. A desperate, filthy little bailout. Helen stepped forward, her voice shaking. Marcus, what is she talking about? What bailout? I will tell you, Helen, I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. Marcus was desperate. The bank was closing in. He needed a massive injection of capital to stave off bankruptcy, but no legitimate lender would touch his toxic balance sheets. So he went to the one person he thought could save him, Trent's father, the great real estate mogul of Atlanta. Marcus begged his new wealthy in-law for a $4 million lifeline to save his logistics company. Trent sneered, stepping between me and Marcus. My father is a smart investor. He saw an opportunity to acquire a struggling transport company and turn it around. It was a standard business acquisition. There is nothing illegal about two families doing business together. I smiled, tapping the blue folder against my hand. A standard business acquisition. Is that what your father called it, Trent? Because it looks a lot more like extortion to me. Your father agreed to bail out Marcus. He agreed to absorb the $4 million in corporate debt and keep the logistics company afloat. But a man like your father does not write a $4 million check out of the goodness of his heart. He demands collateral. He demands a pound of flesh. He wanted something highly valuable in return for saving a sinking ship. I took a slow step toward Trent, watching him tense up. Your father wanted prime real estate. He knew my house was sitting on a highly coveted acre of land in one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the city. A neighborhood where developers are fighting tooth and nail to build luxury condos. But he did not want to pay the $1.2 million market value. He wanted it cheap, so he made a deal with the devil. I looked at Marcus, who had sunk back into his leather chair, looking physically ill. Your father told Marcus that he would provide the bailout on one condition. Marcus had to deliver my house to you, Trent, for a fraction of its worth. $300,000 for a property worth quadruple that amount. It was a massive kickback disguised as a family sale. You used my outdated medical power of attorney to bypass my consent. You sold my $1 million asset for pocket change to grease the wheels for your own corporate bailout. You sacrificed my financial security to save your own fragile ego, Marcus. You sold me out to save yourself. The room fell completely silent. The hum of the air conditioning unit suddenly sounded like a roaring engine. Helen turned slowly to look at her husband. Her eyes were wide with horror. The pristine image of her successful husband was shattering right in front of her. Chloe looked confused, glancing frantically between Trent and Marcus, waiting for someone to deny the accusations. Tell her she is lying, Marcus, Helen whispered, her voice trembling. Tell her the company is fine. Marcus remained frozen, unable to find his voice. The silence in the dining room became a weapon that shattered his carefully constructed authority. Trent, however, did not have the sense to stay quiet. He took a predatory step toward me, invading my personal space. His eyes were cold and his jaw was locked tight. He was clearly accustomed to people bending to his will whenever he flashed a bit of money or social status. I am done playing these little games, he snarled. I did not fly back from my business summit to deal with the delusions of a woman who just got fired. You were told to leave, so leave. If you are still standing on this property in 10 minutes, I will have security throw you out. I do not care about your little stories regarding environmental sites or legal loopholes. That house is mine. I own the deed. I own the land. And I have already hired a demolition crew for 6 in the morning. By noon, that eyesore will be a pile of rubble, and I will have my construction crews breaking ground for a high-end complex by the weekend. Do you hear me, Maya? Your precious house is going to disappear. I looked at Trent and felt a profound sense of pity. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he could not see the trap he had walked into. He thought money solved everything. He thought he could buy his way over the law and stomp on anyone who stood in his path. He really believed that a demolition crew could erase the legal complications he had inherited. I gave him a slow, deliberate smile. I crossed my arms and leaned back against the counter. Please, Trent, I insisted, my voice calm and inviting. I truly hope you bring the bulldozers. In fact, I highly encourage it. Make sure they arrive bright and early. Make sure they start with the main foundation, right where the ground tests indicated the highest concentration of toxic chemicals. Trent narrowed his eyes. What are you babbling about? I pulled a second document from my folder. This one was an official notification from the State Department of Environmental Quality. It was a formal order of remediation. The document stated that because the land is a Level 4 Superfund site, any unauthorized disturbance of the soil or demolition of existing structures prior to official cleanup completion is a violation of federal environmental law. The fines are $5,000 per hour for every hour the site remains disturbed. But that is the least of your problems, Trent. He hesitated, his hand dropping from his pockets. His smug expression began to waver. What kind of fines are you talking about? I continued, speaking as if I were reading from a brochure. Because you purchased the property through an LLC, you are not protected by personal liability shields when it comes to federal environmental violations. The fine is not just $5,000 an hour, it is a daily penalty that stacks up to $50,000 for every day the site is being worked on without a certified environmental cleanup team. Plus, there is a mandatory prison sentence of up to 10 years for the responsible party who orders the demolition of a declared toxic site. So yes, by all means, bring the bulldozers. I would love to watch you go to prison while your company pays the government millions in fines for trying to dump toxic dust into the local air supply. Trent looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the floor. The color had completely drained from my father's face, leaving him looking frail and defeated. He knew I was telling the truth. He knew he had sold Trent a liability that could destroy both of them. Trent turned back to me, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. You are lying. You are just saying this to scare me. I held up the document so he could see the official government seal and the bold red text at the top of the page. This is not a threat, Trent. It is a matter of public record. You can call the State Department of Environmental Quality yourself. The file number is right there. You own a multi-million-dollar toxic waste dump, and because you forced the sale without an inspection period, you bought every ounce of that toxicity. You are now the legal owner of a site that is legally required to be shuttered and cleared by a team of federal contractors. You cannot build condos there. You cannot even walk on the ground without a hazmat suit. Trent stumbled backward, bumping into the side table. A glass vase tipped over and shattered on the floor, but no one moved. The sound of the glass breaking seemed to mark the exact moment Trent's entire plan disintegrated. His dream of a real estate empire, his honeymoon, his social standing in his father's firm, it was all evaporating because he had been too greedy to wait for a proper inspection. I am not the one who should be worried, I added, my voice smooth as silk. I am no longer the owner. You are. The liability lies with the deed holder. And the deed holder is Trent's LLC. Congratulations on your acquisition, Trent. I hope you have a really good lawyer because you are going to need one for the next decade. I turned my attention to my father. He looked like he wanted to disappear. He had been willing to sell his own daughter out to save his business, but he had ended up burying himself and his favorite son-in-law under a mountain of federal debt and criminal liability. You should have asked me what the house was worth before you decided to liquidate it, Dad, I said softly. You could have been the hero of this story. You could have had your debt cleared and your daughter taken care of. But you chose greed. You chose to treat me like a liability to be managed. And now look at where that got you. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The great man who had built his own empire was now nothing but a man who had been outsmarted by the daughter he had spent 30 years underestimating. He knew better than anyone that the game was over. There was no recovery from this. No backroom deal could bypass the federal government when the EPA was involved. I picked up my purse and smoothed the front of my dress. I was done here. I had delivered the news and witnessed the collapse. There was nothing left to do but walk away and let the consequences begin. As I turned toward the exit, Chloe remained in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She still did not seem to understand that her luxury lifestyle was not just pausing, it was ending. I looked at her and felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of detachment. She was a product of the environment they had created, a hollow person living a hollow life. I walked past them all. I did not look back. The front door was waiting for me. I felt the cool air of the foyer on my face. The house smelled of stale cigar smoke and fear. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the night. I walked to my car parked safely in the driveway, feeling like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was not the victim anymore. I was the architect of my own liberation. Everything they had tried to use to destroy me had been the very tool I used to save myself. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving them to their toxic ground and their crumbling legacy. I placed my leather tote bag on the smooth marble surface of the kitchen island. The soft click of the metal hardware seemed to echo in the vast, silent room. Marcus stopped sweating for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting toward my hands. Helen took a cautious step forward, her pearl necklace clinking against her blouse. Trent just crossed his arms, maintaining his arrogant posture, but his jaw was clenched so tight I could see a muscle jumping near his ear. Chloe looked bored, scrolling on her phone, completely oblivious to the financial execution about to take place in her childhood home. I unzipped the bag and slowly pulled out a thick navy blue folder. I laid it flat on the marble. I did not rush. I let the anticipation stretch out, letting their anxiety fill the open space between us. "You see, Trent?" I began, my voice smooth and conversational. "You mentioned earlier that you are a businessman. You bragged about your portfolio, your quick cash transfer, and your lack of an inspection period. You called it a clean family business deal." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the cover of the blue folder. But any first-year law student or junior analyst could tell you that the most important rule of acquiring real estate is verifying the chain of title. Trent scoffed, shifting his weight. "The title was clear, Maya. We ran it through the closing agent. Marcus had the durable general power of attorney. It gave him the right to sell the asset on your behalf. There is no loophole here, so stop pretending you have a magic trick up your sleeve." I opened the folder. I pulled out a single sheet of paper stamped with a shiny gold notary seal. I slid it across the marble island toward him. "I highly recommend you read the date on that document, Trent." He hesitated before stepping forward. He snatched the paper off the counter, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. His arrogant smirk faltered, his brow furrowed in confusion. "This is a transfer of deed," he muttered. "Yes," I replied cheerfully. "That is a transfer of deed." 3 weeks before I boarded my flight to Europe, I transferred the complete ownership of this house out of my personal name. I did not just sign it over to another person. I transferred the entire property into a specialized corporate trust. I am the sole trustee, but legally speaking, Maya, the individual does not own this house anymore. The corporate entity owns the house. Marcus lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the paper from Trent's hands. His eyes widened as he read the bold print at the top of the page. "What does this mean?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave. "It means you committed a felony." "Marcus," I said, my tone dropping to a deadly serious whisper. "That durable general power of attorney you proudly waved in front of the title company today was drafted 5 years ago. It gave you authority over my personal assets. It gave you the right to make decisions for Maya the individual. It absolutely does not give you any legal authority to liquidate assets belonging to a corporate trust. You cannot use a personal power of attorney to sell a corporate asset. You might as well have tried to use it to sell a public park. The blood drained from Marcus' face. He dropped the paper as if it had caught fire. Helen let out a small gasp, covering her mouth with her hand. "But you sold it," Trent stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "You sat across from me at the bank and signed the seller documents. You swore the power of attorney was absolute." I smiled, folding my hands together on the counter. "He swore to a lie, Trent." Marcus walked into a bank, presented an invalid document, and signed his name to a commercial real estate contract he had zero legal authority to execute. In the eyes of the law, that is called forgery. He forged a real estate transaction to illegally acquire funds. And because you transferred that $300,000 electronically across state lines from your investment LLC account into his failing logistics company account, he also committed felony wire fraud. I let the words hang in the air. Felony wire fraud, forgery. The severe reality of those terms crashed into the room, obliterating their smug sense of victory. Chloe finally looked up from her phone, realizing the tone of the room had shifted from a triumphant farewell to a crime scene investigation. "Dad." Chloe whined, her voice trembling slightly. "What is she talking about? Is the house not ours?" I looked at my sister, shaking my head in pity. "No, Chloe. The house is not yours. Trent's little LLC just paid $300,000 in cash for a completely fraudulent deed. The title company will void the sale the moment I notify them of the corporate trust structure. The transaction is null and void. You own absolutely nothing. Your husband handed over a small fortune for a worthless piece of forged paper." Trent turned on Marcus, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You told me the paperwork was ironclad," he screamed, grabbing Marcus by the lapels of his jacket. "You told me this was a clean transfer. You stole my money." Marcus shoved him away, stumbling backward into the sofa. "I did not know," he stammered, looking at me with wild, desperate eyes. "She set me up. She planned this to destroy us. She knew I would use the power of attorney." I laughed, a sharp, genuine sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "You are blaming me for your felony, Marcus." "I simply protected my assets because I knew exactly who you were. I knew you were a desperate man drowning in debt. I knew you would steal from me to save your own failing logistics company." Marcus stared at me, his chest heaving as he struggled to process the magnitude of his own failure. He looked to his wife for support, but Helen was already stepping into the breach, replacing her initial horror with a mask of practiced denial. She walked around the kitchen island, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. She refused to look at the blue folder. Instead, she fixed her gaze on me, projecting the same condescending authority she had used to dismiss my entire life. "You are being hysterical," Maya Helen said, her voice dripping with artificial calm. "You are throwing around big legal words that you clearly do not understand. A felony. Wire fraud. Please. This is a family matter, and you are blowing it entirely out of proportion just to punish your father for making a difficult business decision." I did not flinch. "A difficult business decision, Helen. He forged a federal document to steal my home. That is not a business strategy. That is a crime." Marcus seemed to draw strength from Helen's delusion. He stood up straighter, adjusting his collar, though his hands were still shaking visibly. "Your mother is right, Maya," he declared, puffing out his chest. "You are trying to use a technicality to scare us. But we live in the real world. In the real world, transactions are finalized by the banks, and the bank has already spoken. Trent wired the $300,000 this morning. The funds have cleared my corporate accounts. The title agency processed the paperwork. You cannot just unring a bell because you filed some obscure trust document 3 weeks ago. The money moved. The deal is done." Trent seized on Marcus' logic like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. He let out a harsh bark of laughter, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He stepped forward, pointing a finger at me. "Exactly," he sneered. "You think you are so clever with your little folder and your dramatic announcements? But you are forgetting who you are dealing with here. My father did not build a real estate empire by letting amateur hour trustees void our contracts." The wire cleared Maya. Do you know what that means? It means the asset is mine. The transaction is fully executed and recognized by the financial institutions involved. You are too late. I looked between the three of them, marveling at their shared desperation. They were clinging to the illusion of the cleared funds as if a bank transfer somehow validated a fraudulent contract. A cleared wire transfer does not legitimize a forged signature, Trent, I explained, speaking slowly, as if addressing a stubborn child. If you steal a car and the buyer hands you cash, the car does not legally belong to the buyer just because the money changed hands. The transaction is fundamentally invalid. The deed belongs to the corporate trust. Your LLC sent $300,000 to Marcus Logistics based on a fraudulent premise. The bank will reverse the wire the moment the fraud division is notified. Trent slammed his hand flat against the marble countertop, making everyone jump except me. You are not notifying anyone, he shouted, his face twisting with rage. You are going to pack your bags and leave. My corporate lawyers will crush you in court. Do you have any idea how much money my father retains in legal counsel? We have an entire floor of attorneys in downtown Atlanta who specialize in real estate acquisitions and contract law. They eat people like you for breakfast. They will tie you up in litigation for so many years that you will go bankrupt just trying to pay the filing fees. We will bury you in injunctions and motions until you are begging us to take the property off your hands. Helen nodded emphatically, crossing her arms. Trent is absolutely right, Maya. You cannot afford to fight us. You just lost your job. You have no income. How exactly do you plan to pay for a drawn-out legal battle against the best corporate lawyers in the city? You are bluffing. You created this fake trust hoping we would just roll over and give you what you want. But we are calling your bluff. The house is sold. The money is in your father's account, saving the family business. You should be happy that you could contribute to the family legacy, instead of standing here threatening us with imaginary felonies. Marcus stepped closer, flanking Trent. We hold the cards, Maya. We have the capital. We have the legal team. We have the cleared funds. You are standing there with nothing but a blue folder and a lot of resentment. Be reasonable. Walk away now, and I will not press charges against you for harassment. I will even give you a few $1,000s from the sale to help you find a cheap apartment until you secure a new job. That is more than generous, considering how disrespectful you are being to your own parents. I let them talk. I let them build their fragile fortress of denial. They truly believed that their money and their status made them immune to the law. They thought they could gaslight me into surrendering my own property. They thought my recent job loss meant I was vulnerable and desperate. You are going to crush me in court? I asked, looking directly at Trent. Trent smirked, his arrogant posture fully restored. Like a bug, Maya. My lawyers will dismantle your little trust fund trick before the judge even returns from his lunch break. You are playing in a league you do not understand. My family owns this city. You are just a jobless woman throwing a temper tantrum because she lost her house. Helen chimed in again, her voice dripping with venom. It is over, Maya. Stop embarrassing yourself. Trent is being gracious enough to let you walk away without a lawsuit. You should just take your father's offer. I looked at my mother and let out a laugh that was entirely devoid of humor. You want me to take a few $1,000s from a fraudulent sale while Trent threatens to bury me in litigation? It is fascinating how you all operate under the assumption that the person with the loudest voice and the most expensive suit automatically dictates reality. You honestly believe that transferring funds magically absolves you of legal liability. Trent crossed his arms, his designer watch catching the light from the chandelier. It is not an assumption, Maya. It is how business works. The deed is recorded under my company name. The wire transfer is complete. I own the property, and you have zero leverage. I opened my blue folder for the second time. I did not pull out another trust document. Instead, I extracted a thick packet of papers bound by a heavy metal clip. The top page featured the bold official seal of the Environmental Protection Agency. If you are so certain that you own the property, Trent, I said, my tone dropping to a dead calm, then I suppose you also own everything buried underneath it. Marcus frowned, stepping closer to the island. What is that? What did you bring into my house? I slid the thick packet across the marble surface, letting it stop right in front of Trent. That is a Phase 2 environmental site assessment, along with a formal classification notice from the federal government. You see, Trent, when my grandfather bought that property 50 years ago, the neighborhood was just starting to be developed. Before it was a luxury residential street, it was part of an old industrial manufacturing sector. Specifically, it housed a chemical processing facility that went bankrupt in the 1940s. They buried their waste tanks underground and paved over them. Helen rolled her eyes, adjusting her posture. Maya, no one cares about ancient history. We are talking about a prime piece of real estate today. The EPA cares very much about ancient history. Helen, I snapped, turning my attention back to Trent. 3 months ago, my neighbors hired a contractor to install a deep foundation pool. During the excavation, they hit a corroded steel tank. Toxic sludge flooded the subsoil. The state immediately halted all construction in a 2-block radius and called in federal regulators to conduct deep core soil testing. That packet right in front of you contains the results for my specific lot. Trent stared at the packet but did not reach for it. His jaw remained clenched, but the smug arrogance in his eyes began to flicker, replaced by the first trace of genuine apprehension. 2 weeks before you executed your brilliant little hostile takeover, I continued, I received that notice. The EPA officially classified the land under my house as a Level 4 toxic Superfund site. The soil is completely saturated with heavy metals and industrial solvents. The groundwater is contaminated. It is an active environmental hazard. Marcus let out a sharp breath, his face losing the last of its color. A Superfund site. That is impossible. The city would have condemned the property. They were in the process of doing exactly that, Marcus. The federal mandate requires a total chemical remediation of the entire plot before any human being can safely inhabit or develop the land. The required procedure involves excavating 30 feet of soil, treating the contaminated groundwater, and installing a permanent vapor barrier. Do you know how much a mandatory federal chemical cleanup costs on a Level 4 Superfund site, Trent? Trent remained silent, his breathing turning shallow. I smiled, tapping the EPA document. The minimum estimate provided by the government contractors is $2.5 million. And because the contamination poses an immediate public health risk, the cleanup is not optional. It is a mandatory federal order that must be executed by the current property owner within 90 days of the notice. Trent finally moved. He snatched the packet off the counter, flipping frantically through the pages. His eyes scanned the government letterheads, the soil toxicity reports, and the bold red warnings regarding federal compliance. I was in the process of applying for a specialized federal grant designed to protect individual homeowners from historical industrial liabilities. I explained, my voice perfectly steady. The government has a relief fund for residents who unknowingly inherit toxic land. I had lawyers working pro bono to shield me from the $2.5 million liability. The process takes months, but it would have completely protected my finances. I paused, letting the silence stretch out before delivering the final blow. But you just ruined that safety net, Trent. The federal relief fund is strictly for individual residential homeowners. It explicitly excludes corporate entities and commercial developers. By using Marcus and his fraudulent power of attorney to bypass the standard inspection period and rush the sale into your corporate LLC, you entirely voided my grant application. You bought the property as a commercial investment vehicle. The EPA does not offer financial aid to commercial developers who fail to perform basic due diligence. The heavy packet of papers slipped from Trent's hands and landed on the marble counter with a loud thud. He stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. You bought the house, Trent, I said, leaning forward. You transferred the funds. You proudly claimed ownership just 5 minutes ago, which means your LLC is now the sole legal entity responsible for a mandatory $2.5 million federal cleanup. If you fail to initiate the remediation process within the next 70 days, the EPA will seize your corporate assets, freeze your bank accounts, and hold you personally liable. Helen gasped, grabbing Marcus' arm. Marcus looked physically ill, staring at Trent as if looking at a ghost. You set me up. Trent choked out, his voice barely a whisper. You knew I wanted the land. You let Marcus sell it to me. Now we both fall. I stepped away from the kitchen island, watching the two men turn on each other like starving wolves. Trent stepped toward my father, his fists clenched at his sides. "You miserable old fool," Trent spat out. "You knew about this. You knew the land was poisoned, and you used my money to bail out your sinking company. You sold me a federal liability to save yourself." Marcus backed up, his hands raised defensively. "I swear to you, Trent, I had no idea. She never told me about any environmental assessment. I thought she just could not afford the property taxes anymore. I thought I was doing us both a favor by getting rid of it quickly." "A favor," Trent yelled, his face turning purple. "You committed wire fraud and tied my corporate LLC to a $2.5 million federal cleanup. My father is going to absolutely destroy both of us. He will cut me off completely. He will leave me to take the fall for this entire mess." I cleared my throat, bringing their attention back to the blue folder still resting on the marble counter. "I hate to interrupt this beautiful family bonding moment," I said, my voice laced with false sympathy. "But you are both missing the most entertaining part of this transaction. Trent, you keep blaming Marcus for tricking you, but you are giving him far too much credit. He did not set a trap for you. You built the trap yourself, locked the door, and swallowed the key." Trent whipped his head around to glare at me. "What are you talking about now, Maya? Have you not done enough damage for one night?" I reached into the blue folder for the final time. I pulled out a thick stapled document with Trent's elegant signature scrawled across the bottom page. I held it up so the overhead lights caught the blue ink. "This is a copy of the purchasing contract you drafted, Trent. The one your highly paid corporate lawyers put together to ensure you could acquire my property before anyone else caught wind of the sale." Trent stared at the document, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "It is a standard commercial acquisition contract," he muttered. "There is nothing special about it. It just expedited the transfer of the deed." "Exactly," I agreed, smiling widely. "It expedited the transfer. And how exactly did your brilliant legal team manage to bypass the mandatory 30-day commercial escrow period? How did they convince the title agency to clear a cash sale in less than 48 hours? Trent swallowed hard but refused to answer. He knew exactly what he had done. "I will tell you how I continued tossing the contract onto the counter. You waived every single contingency. In your greedy rush to steal $1 million property for $300,000, you drafted a contract that classified your LLC as an independent commercial investor purchasing the property strictly as is. You specifically waived the right to a geological survey. You waived the right to an environmental inspection. You waived the right to hold the previous owner liable for any undiscovered defects." Helen let out a sharp cry, pressing her hands against her cheeks. "Trent, what does that mean? Tell me she is lying." "She is not lying, Helen," I said, stepping closer to the island. Trent thought he was being a ruthless businessman. He thought waiving the inspections would prevent me from finding out about the sale until it was too late. He wanted to bulldoze my home before I even returned from Europe. But that strict as-is clause is a double-edged sword. By signing a federal document stating you purchased the land as is with zero contingencies, you legally assumed 100% of the liability for anything hidden in that soil. Trent stumbled backward, his legs hitting the edge of the velvet sofa. He sat down heavily, looking like he might vomit. "My lawyers," he whispered, running a trembling hand through his hair. "They said it was the fastest way to secure the asset. They said there was no risk because it was just a residential lot in a wealthy neighborhood." "Your lawyers assumed you were buying a normal house, Trent," I corrected him. "They did not know you were buying a Level 4 Superfund site. And because you signed that specific waiver, the EPA will not go after Marcus. They will not go after me. They will come exclusively for your LLC. You own the toxic waste. You own the $2.5 million cleanup bill. And because you waived the inspection, you have absolutely zero legal grounds to sue Marcus for misrepresentation. You bought it as is. You own it as is." The silence in the dining room was suffocating, the reality of the financial ruin settling over them like a thick, heavy blanket. Chloe finally stepped forward, her expensive white dress swishing around her legs. She looked at her husband with an expression of pure terror. "Trent," she whimpered, her voice trembling. "What are we going to do? We just booked the architect for the renovations on our primary house. We just bought the new cars. Can you not just sell it to someone else?" Trent looked at his wife with an expression of utter disgust. "Sell it to who, Chloe? Who is going to buy a toxic waste dump for $300,000? I cannot sell it. I cannot build on it. I cannot even abandon it because the federal government knows my LLC owns it. If I default on the cleanup, they will seize my personal assets. They will take my bank accounts. They will take our house. Everything is gone." I leaned against the marble counter, enjoying the absolute devastation radiating from the man who had confidently threatened to demolish my home just 10 minutes earlier. Speaking of demolition, I said, keeping my tone bright and conversational. "You mentioned that you have a crew scheduled to arrive at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. You said they were going to turn my house into a pile of rubble by noon." Trent squeezed his eyes shut, resting his forehead in his hands. "Call them off," he choked out. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "Call them off? But you were so eager to break ground for your luxury condos. You were so proud of your swift executive action. I really think you should let them proceed, Trent." He looked up at me, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Shut up, Maya. Just shut up. I am ruined. Is that what you want to hear? I am completely ruined. I want you to understand the full scope of your situation, Trent," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "The EPA notice explicitly mandates that the soil must remain undisturbed until the certified chemical remediation team arrives. If your demolition crew shows up tomorrow morning and starts tearing into that foundation, they will release toxic dust directly into the air. Do you know what the EPA does when an unauthorized commercial developer intentionally disturbs a Level 4 Superfund site?" Trent shook his head slowly, his eyes wide and vacant. "They triple the fines," I said, clearly articulating every syllable. "The cleanup cost jumps from $2.5 million to $7.5 million instantly. And they will pursue criminal negligence charges against the executive who ordered the demolition. So if those bulldozers touch my house tomorrow, you will not just be bankrupt, Trent. You will be facing federal prison time." Trent grabbed his phone from his pocket, his fingers shaking so violently he dropped it twice before he managed to dial a number. He pressed the phone to his ear, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Cancel the crew," he screamed into the receiver the moment the line connected. "I do not care if we lose the deposit. Cancel the demolition right now. If a single bulldozer touches that property, you are all fired." He ended the call and threw the phone onto the cushion beside him. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The arrogant, wealthy investor who had tried to steal my life was completely broken, reduced to a terrified man facing federal prosecution. Helen turned to Marcus, her face contorted with panic. "Marcus, do something," she demanded, hitting his arm. "Call your lawyers. Call the bank. We have to fix this. We cannot let Trent go bankrupt. He is our son-in-law. He is funding your logistics company. If he goes down, we go down." Marcus looked at his wife with hollow, defeated eyes. "There is nothing to fix, Helen. He bought it as is. The money is already tied up in the logistics company payroll. If Trent demands the money back, the company folds tomorrow. If we keep the money, Trent goes to prison. We are trapped." I watched the family implode, my heart steady and calm. They had built their lives on lies, greed, and manipulation. Now the foundation was collapsing beneath them, and there was no one left to blame but themselves. But I was not finished yet. I had one final truth to deliver. "Actually, Marcus," I said, breaking the heavy silence, "you might want to hold off on worrying about Trent's bankruptcy. You have a much more pressing problem to deal with." Marcus looked up, his brow furrowed. "What are you talking about, Maya? What else could possibly go wrong?" I reached into the blue folder one last time. I pulled out a single sheet of paper with a very familiar bank logo printed at the top. I slid it across the marble island. "You really should check your corporate accounts more carefully, Dad, especially when you are relying on stolen money to make your payroll." Marcus stared at the bank statement I pushed across the marble island. His eyes darted over the printed lines and the blood drained completely from his face. The paper detailed the $300,000 wire transfer from Trent's LLC to Marcus Logistics. But right below the deposit confirmation was a bold red status update. The funds were flagged by the Bank Fraud Division and frozen pending a federal investigation. I had notified the fraud department yesterday morning. "You do not have access to that money, Dad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "The bank froze your entire corporate account because the incoming wire was tied to a fraudulent real estate transaction. You cannot use those funds for your payroll. You cannot use them to pay your vendors. Your logistics company is officially completely paralyzed, and you are holding a frozen account full of stolen money." Trent snatched the paper out of Marcus, and his eyes scanning the frozen status. His hands shook so violently the paper rattled. The reality of his situation finally crushed the last remaining fragments of his arrogant facade. He was not just out $300,000, he was legally shackled to a $2.5 million federal toxic waste cleanup. And the man he had conspired with was now locked out of the banking system, entirely unable to offer a single dime of help. Trent let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. He crumpled the bank statement and threw it at Marcus' chest. "You set me up, you incompetent fool," Trent roared. "You knew this was a trap. You used me as a shield to absorb your toxic asset, and you stole my cash to save your pathetic, failing company." "I did not know," Marcus shouted back, raising his hands defensively. "I swear to you, Trent, I had no idea the EPA was involved. She set us both up. Look at her. She planned this entire thing." "Do not try to deflect this onto her," Trent snarled, taking a menacing step toward Marcus. "You are the one who signed the fraudulent power of attorney. You are the one who guaranteed the title was clear. I should have known better than to do business with you people. My father warned me about getting involved with your kind." Helen gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Trent, please, we are family. We are on the same side." "Family," Trent laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "We are not family, Helen. We will never be family. You and your husband are nothing but street hustlers playing dress-up in a nice neighborhood. You think wearing expensive suits and joining a country club makes you equal to my family. My grandfather built this city. You two are just ghetto scam artists trying to hustle your way out of the gutter." Marcus stiffened, his pride finally overriding his panic. "Watch your mouth, Trent. You are standing in my house. You married my daughter. You do not get to talk to us like that." "I will talk to you however I want," Trent screamed, his face twisted with pure rage. "You are trash, Marcus. You have always been trash. You run a low-class trucking company that barely turns a profit, and you rely on my family connections to keep you afloat. I married Chloe because she was pretty and compliant, not because I wanted to tie my legacy to a family of incompetent frauds. You dragged my corporate LLC into a federal environmental crime. You ruined my life. I am going to have my lawyers tear your entire existence apart. I will see you in federal prison before I pay a single cent to the EPA." "You signed the waiver, Trent," Marcus bellowed, taking a step forward, his fists clenched. "You were so greedy, so desperate to steal a property for a fraction of its value that you waived the inspections. You thought you were so much smarter than everyone else. But you are just a spoiled rich kid who uses his daddy's money to bully people. You bought the land. You signed the as-is contract. This is your mess. Do not try to pin your sheer stupidity on me." Helen stepped between them, holding her hands up, as if she could physically stop the alliance from shattering. "Stop it, both of you. Screaming at each other will not fix this. Trent, we can figure this out. Marcus can transfer the money back as soon as the bank unfreezes the account. We can hire better lawyers to fight the EPA. We have to stick together." "Shut up," Helen Trent snapped, shoving her hands away. "You are just as guilty as he is. You sat there smiling while you helped him forge documents to steal from your own daughter. You are a disgusting excuse for a mother, and a pathetic excuse for a human being. Do not pretend you care about finding a solution. You only care about keeping my money flowing into your bank accounts so you can keep buying designer shoes and pretending you belong in high society." Helen shrank back, tears welling in her eyes. Her perfectly crafted image of the supportive, wealthy matriarch dissolved completely under Trent's vicious verbal assault. "Do not speak to my wife that way," Marcus shouted, lunging forward. He grabbed Trent by the collar of his expensive custom shirt. "You arrogant little punk! You think your money makes you invincible. I built my company from nothing while you were having everything handed to you on a silver platter. I will not let you insult my family." Trent shoved Marcus hard in the chest, breaking his grip. He stumbled backward, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "You have no family. You sold out your daughter for a payday, and now you are trying to sell me out. You are a parasite. I will destroy you. You will spend your life behind bars." Trent stood there facing Marcus, his chest heaving rapidly. The air in the kitchen was thick with a toxic mixture of panic and rage. Chloe could no longer maintain her carefully cultivated posture of the wealthy, unbothered housewife. She rushed forward, her heels slipping slightly on the polished tile, and grabbed Trent's arm. Her manicured fingers dug into the fabric of his tailored suit. "Trent, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "You are scaring me. Please, just calm down. We can call your father. He has an entire team of crisis managers. They fix things like this all the time. Just step away from my dad and let us think." Trent did not even look at her at first. He kept his furious gaze locked on Marcus, as if he wanted to tear the older man apart with his bare hands. Chloe pulled harder on his sleeve, her perfectly applied makeup beginning to run down her cheeks in dark streaks. "Trent, listen to me." Chloe begged, her voice escalating into a hysterical shriek. "You are my husband. We are supposed to be a team. We can survive this if we just work together. Please do not let this tear us apart. I love you. We have a life together. Think about our future." Trent finally turned his head to look at his wife. There was no affection in his eyes. There was no partnership. There was only absolute revulsion. He violently yanked his arm out of her grasp, with so much force that Chloe stumbled backward and collided with the edge of the kitchen island. She let out a sharp gasp, clutching her side, but Trent did not flinch. "Do not touch me!" he snarled, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Do not ever put your hands on me again. You think I want to be a team with you. You think I want anything to do with this pathetic excuse for a family. My father was right about all of you from the very beginning. He told me not to marry into a family of bottom feeders. He told me you were just a bunch of cheap scam artists trying to climb the social ladder on my dime." Chloe stared at him, her mouth hanging open. The cruel words struck her like physical blows. "Trent," she whispered, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. "How can you say that? I am your wife." "You are a liability," Trent shouted, stepping toward her. "You and your street hustler parents just cost me millions of dollars, and potentially my freedom. You think I care about our future right now? Our future is dead, Chloe. My father is going to disinherit me the second he finds out I dragged the family name into a federal environmental crime. I am going straight to bankruptcy court, and I am leaving you and your fraudulent family behind to rot." Helen rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her weeping daughter. "How dare you speak to her that way?" Helen demanded, glaring at Trent. "She had nothing to do with this transaction. She is innocent." "There are no innocent people in this room except her," Trent fired back, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "You all thought you were so clever. You thought you could steal her property and use my money to fund your pathetic little logistics empire. You used your own daughter as a pawn, and you used my wife as bait to get into my bank account. You are all garbage. I am filing for divorce the second the banks open tomorrow morning." Chloe let out a gut-wrenching wail. She collapsed against her mother, her knees giving out completely. The perfect, pristine life she had built on a foundation of my stolen inheritance was dissolving right in front of her eyes. She had married Trent for his status and his wealth. Now the wealth was frozen, the status was tied to a federal crime, and the husband she worshipped looked at her like she was a piece of trash stuck to the bottom of his shoe. For a moment, the only sound in the room was Chloe's hysterical sobbing. Marcus stared blankly at the floor, his hands trembling. Trent paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair as he muttered frantically to himself about lawyers and asset protection. Then Chloe slowly lifted her head. Her tear-streaked face twisted into an expression of pure, unadulterated venom. She pushed herself away from her mother and turned her furious gaze entirely on me. Her sadness vanished instantly, replaced by the same toxic entitlement that had defined her entire life. "This is your fault," Chloe screamed, lunging toward me. Helen had to grab her by the waist to pull her back. "You did this, Maya. You set this trap to ruin my life. You could not stand the fact that I married a successful man. You could not stand the fact that I was happy. You planned this whole thing just to destroy my marriage." I did not move a single muscle. I watched her thrash against her mother's, grip my face a mask of absolute calm. "I did not forge a federal document, Chloe," I replied, my voice low and steady. "I did not trick your husband into signing an as-is contract. I did not force him to wire $300,000 to your father. You did this to yourselves." "Take it back," Chloe demanded, her voice scraping against her throat. "Take the house back right now." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "You heard me," she shrieked, pointing at the blue folder. "Void the contract. Sign whatever papers you need to sign and take the property back. You have to fix this, Maya. You have to save my marriage. If you take it back, Trent will not be liable for the cleanup. The federal EPA will go after you instead. You owe me this much. You are my sister." I stared at Chloe, letting her hysterical demand echo through the cavernous kitchen. "I owe you this much." I repeated the words, slowly tasting the absolute absurdity of her delusion. "We have not spoken in 3 years, Chloe. You did not invite me to your wedding. You laughed when Marcus threw me out of my childhood bedroom to build your walk-in closet. You stood right there 10 minutes ago and told me to pack my bags and crawl back to whatever miserable hole I came from. But now that your billionaire husband is facing federal prosecution and your limitless credit cards are about to be frozen, you suddenly remember we share DNA. You have to!" Chloe sobbed, stepping toward me with her hands clasped together in a desperate plea. "Please, Maya. Trent will leave me. He will divorce me, and I will have nothing. I cannot be poor. I do not know how to live like that. You are used to struggling. You know how to survive without money. But I cannot do it. Just sign the paper and take the liability. The government will feel sorry for you because you are unemployed. They will give you the grant. They will not give it to Trent." I looked at my sister, marveling at the sheer depth of her selfishness. She was literally begging me to take on a $2.5 million federal debt just so she could keep her designer lifestyle. I stepped around the island, putting distance between us. "I am not signing anything, Chloe. I am not taking the house back. You wanted the property. You forged the signatures. You executed the wire transfer. The transaction is complete and the liability belongs entirely to your husband. I am walking out of here with zero debt and a clean slate. You are going to have to learn how to shop at discount stores." Chloe let out a breathless shriek and spun around to face Trent. "Trent, tell her she has to do it. Force her to sign the papers. You have lawyers. Make them draft a reversal." Trent did not even look at her. He was staring blankly at the wall, his mind calculating the massive financial crater he had just stepped into. "Force her with what leverage, Chloe?" he muttered, his voice hollow and defeated. "She filed the trust document 3 weeks ago. She holds all the cards. We bought a fraudulent deed. My legal team cannot force her to reclaim a toxic asset. I am financially paralyzed. We are done. I am done with you." Chloe collapsed onto the floor, weeping uncontrollably into her hands. Helen dropped to her knees beside her, stroking her hair and glaring up at me with pure hatred. "You are a monster," Maya, Helen spat. "You destroyed your own family for money." "I did not destroy anything, Helen. I just handed you the mirror you refused to look into." Marcus slammed his hand onto the marble countertop, making a sharp cracking sound that silenced Chloe's wailing. "Enough," he roared, his face red and sweating. "Stop crying like a child, Chloe. And you, Maya, stop acting like you have completely won. You think you are the smartest person in the room, but you forget who built this family. I built a logistics empire from the ground up. I know how to navigate financial hurdles. Marcus adjusted his collar, trying to project the authority that was rapidly slipping away. He looked at Trent, his chest puffing out with false confidence. "Trent, we can still salvage this. The bank froze the $300,000, but it is still sitting in my corporate holding account. I will call the branch manager tomorrow morning. I have a 20-year relationship with that bank. I will tell them the wire was a clerical error and authorize a direct return to your LLC. Once you have your cash back, you can pay the initial EPA fines and hire an environmental law firm to drag the remediation process out for a decade in appeals court. In the meantime, my logistics company is still generating revenue. I will float the legal fees until we figure out a loophole to dump the property on a shell corporation. We are not dead yet." I could not help it. I laughed. It was a genuine, bright laugh that echoed loudly in the tense room. Marcus and Trent both turned to stare at me as if I had lost my mind. "You are going to call the branch manager?" I asked, wiping a tear of amusement from my eye. "You think a 20-year relationship with a local bank manager overrides a federal fraud investigation? Marcus, you really have absolutely no idea what I actually do for a living, do you?" Helen sneered from the floor. "You are a low-level administrative assistant who just got fired. You do not know anything about corporate finance." I smiled, folding my arms across my chest. "That is the story you told your country club friends because you were embarrassed that I did not want to work for the family business. But no, Helen, I was not an administrative assistant. Before my company downsized, I was a senior mergers and acquisitions auditor for a global financial firm. My entire job was investigating corporate restructuring, tearing apart commercial loan portfolios, and identifying illegal asset shielding before acquisitions. I know exactly how commercial banking systems react to fraud flags." Marcus blinked, his false confidence faltering. "So what? You are an auditor. That does not change the fact that my logistics company is still generating revenue." "Your logistics company generates revenue, but it operates entirely on leveraged commercial debt," I said coldly. "When you structured your business loans, you used a standard cross-collateralization clause. By flagging your account for fraud, I triggered an automatic default. The bank is seizing your entire logistics fleet tomorrow morning. You have absolutely nothing left, Marcus. You are utterly finished. Done." Marcus stared at me, his jaw working silently before he let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. "You are bluffing, Maya. Banks do not just seize an entire commercial fleet over a single flagged wire transfer. I have millions in revolving credit lines. I have contracts with major shipping retailers. They need my trucks on the road. You cannot just call a fraud hotline and shut down a legitimate corporation." "You are right, Marcus," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "A single flagged wire transfer does not shut down a corporation, but a material breach of contract does. When you took out those massive expansion loans 5 years ago, you secured them with every single asset you owned: your trucks, your warehouses, your accounts receivable, and your personal real estate portfolio. The bank demanded an ironclad cross-collateralization clause because your profit margins were dangerously thin." Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the blue folder on the counter. His bluff was beginning to crumble, but he refused to surrender. "Every logistics company uses leveraged debt," he argued, his voice losing its booming authority. "It is standard industry practice. The bank wants their interest payments. They do not want my trucks. They want their collateral secure." I corrected, my tone razor sharp. "And you violated the core covenant of your commercial lending agreement. Section 4, paragraph 2. The borrower shall not engage in any unvetted off-book real estate transactions that expose the guarantor to catastrophic liability. When you orchestrated this illegal under-the-table sale of my property, you bypassed commercial escrow. You bypassed the title agency. You accepted a direct wire transfer of $300,000 from a Shell LLC for a property you did not legally possess the right to sell." Trent let out a bitter laugh. "You idiot!" he hissed at Marcus. "You lied to your own commercial lenders." "He did more than lie, Trent." I continued, keeping my gaze locked on my father. "He commingled the funds, By accepting your dirty money directly into his primary operating account, Marcus tied his entire corporate infrastructure to a federal environmental crime. The bank algorithms are designed to detect exactly this kind of erratic, high-risk behavior. When I submitted the EPA documentation alongside the proof of the forged power of attorney, the fraud division did not just freeze the $300,000. They initiated an immediate default protocol on your entire portfolio. Helen gripped the edge of the kitchen island, her knuckles turning white. "What does that mean, Marcus?" she demanded, her voice trembling with panic. "What is an immediate default protocol? She is exaggerating, Helen." Marcus snapped, though a sheen of cold sweat had broken out across his forehead. "It is a temporary hold. I will call the regional director tomorrow. We play golf together. I will explain the situation and he will clear the restriction. There is no regional director who can override a federal compliance mandate." "Marcus," I said, shaking my head. The second the bank confirmed the funds were tied to a Level 4 Superfund site, they were legally obligated to sever all ties with your entity. Your revolving credit lines are gone. Your operating accounts are locked. Your payroll cannot be processed. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of a cell phone shattered the heavy silence in the room. The sound echoed off the marble countertops, making Helen flinch. Marcus reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen, his face draining of whatever color it had left. "Answer it, Marcus," I challenged, nodding toward the vibrating device. "That will be David, your chief financial officer. He is calling because the night shift drivers are trying to fuel up at the commercial depots and their corporate cards are being declined." Marcus glared at me, his thumb hovering over the screen. He hesitated, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. The phone continued to ring, a persistent electronic demand that filled the entire kitchen. "Answer the phone, Dad!" Chloe shrieked from the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Tell us she is lying. Prove it!" With a trembling finger, Marcus swiped the screen and pressed the phone to his ear. "David," he said, trying to keep his voice steady but failing miserably. "What is going on?" I watched Marcus closely as the tiny, tinny voice of his CFO drifted from the receiver. I could not make out the exact words, but I did not need to. The physical transformation of the man standing in front of me told the entire story. His shoulders slumped forward, as if an invisible weight had just been dropped onto his back. His eyes widened in absolute terror, and his mouth fell open in a silent gasp. "David, slow down," Marcus stammered, gripping the edge of the island for physical support. "What do you mean the master accounts are locked? Call the emergency merchant line. We have 60 trucks on the highway right now. They need fuel." The voice on the other end grew louder, more frantic. "No," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "That is impossible. They cannot pull the credit facility without a 30-day notice. Check the secondary holding accounts. Check the payroll reserves. We have to have something liquid. We have to keep the fleet moving." Marcus listened for another 10 seconds before his legs finally gave out. He sank onto one of the velvet bar stools, dropping the phone onto the marble counter. The call was still connected, the CFO's panicked voice continuing to echo in the quiet room. "David, we are dead," Marcus whispered, staring blankly at the wall. "Tell the dispatchers to ground the fleet. Tell the drivers to park the trucks wherever they are and leave the keys inside. We cannot pay for fuel. We cannot pay their wages. It is over." I stood silently watching the complete destruction of his entire world unfold right before my own two eyes. The silence that followed Marcus dropping the phone was heavy enough to crush bone. He remained frozen on the velvet bar stool, staring at the marble counter with vacant eyes. His logistics empire, a company he had prioritized over his own daughter for decades, was bleeding out on the kitchen island. Trent snapped out of his own paralyzed stupor. His survival instinct kicked in, overriding the shock of the federal cleanup liability. He began patting down his suit jacket pockets with frantic, erratic movements. He pulled out his sleek smartphone, his thumb frantically swiping across the screen. "What are you doing?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling as she wiped mascara from her cheeks. "I am calling my father." Trent snapped, his eyes glued to the screen. He is the only one who can fix this mess. He has a team of corporate fixers on retainer. He can wire funds to cover the EPA fines and get his legal team to untangle my LLC from your idiot father's frozen accounts. I just have to explain that I was defrauded. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I really would not make that call if I were you, Trent. He paused, his thumb hovering over the dial button to glare at me. You do not get to give me advice, Maya. You have done enough. My father is a billionaire. He swats away federal fines like flies. He will bail me out and then he will bury you. He might bail you out, I agreed, nodding slowly. But he is going to ask you a very specific question first. And if you do not have a good answer, that phone call is going to end with him calling the police on his own son. Trent let out a harsh, dismissive scoff, but his thumb remained frozen above the screen. What are you babbling about now? My father loves me. I am his sole heir. He loves his money, Trent. I corrected, my tone entirely devoid of sympathy. And he loves his corporate reputation. So when you call him crying about a $2.5 million toxic waste cleanup, he is going to ask how you managed to purchase a contaminated property without his legal team conducting their mandatory due diligence. Trent swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He tightened his grip on the phone. I am an independent investor. I have my own LLC. You have a shell company, I countered, taking a step toward him. A shell company that had exactly $0 in its operating account last month. I know this because my former firm audited your father's primary holding corporation last quarter. I saw the strict financial controls he placed on your trust fund after you blew $2 million on that failed tech startup last year. He cut off your discretionary capital. He mandated that every single real estate acquisition you make must be vetted by his senior partners. Chloe looked up at her husband, confusion momentarily replacing her panic. Trent, what is she talking about? You told me your father gave you a blank check for investments. He lied, Chloe, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Trent's increasingly pale face. His father put him on a strict financial leash, which makes this entire transaction incredibly interesting. Trent took a step back, hitting the edge of the refrigerator. Shut up, Maya. You needed $300,000 in liquid cash to buy my house? I continued, my voice rising to fill the massive room. You needed it fast so you could bypass the standard 30-day escrow period and force the sale before I returned from Europe. You knew your father's legal team would never approve a cash purchase without a geological survey, so you could not ask him for the money. You had to find it yourself. Stop talking, Trent shouted, his voice cracking. Where did you get $300,000 in untraceable cash, Trent? I asked, tilting my head. Because an M&A auditor like me knows that money never just appears out of thin air. It leaves a paper trail. I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen to bring up a digital document. I accessed the public corporate filings for your father's new commercial development in the financial district. The one you are supposedly managing. Trent dropped his phone. It clattered against the marble floor, the screen cracking. I smiled, scrolling through the digital ledger. You authorized a massive payment to a fictitious concrete supplier last week. $300,000 routed through a vendor account that just happens to be registered to the same registered agent as your Shell LLC. You did not just bypass your father's legal team, Trent. You embezzled from his flagship development project to fund your illegal side hustle. The color vanished from Chloe's face. She stared at Trent as if she was looking at a complete stranger. You stole from your father, she whispered. He embezzled corporate funds, I clarified, turning to look at Marcus, who was now staring at his son-in-law with wide, horrified eyes. Trent committed corporate fraud to buy a toxic waste dump. So go ahead, Trent. Make the call. Tell your billionaire father that you stole his money to buy a Superfund site and that you just exposed his primary development firm to a federal EPA investigation. Trent fell to his knees, his hands gripping his hair as he let out a strangled, agonizing sob. The absolute reality of his destruction finally settled over him, crushing the last remnants of his pride into dust. He was a thief, a fraud, and a failure. and he was completely out of options. Every single illegal shortcut he had taken to prove his independence had only tightened the noose around his neck until there was truly absolutely no room left for him to breathe. Trent stayed on the floor trembling. I looked down at him feeling no pity. The silence stretched tight across the room, broken only by the ragged sound of his breathing. You really thought you were a genius, Trent? You figured you would buy a distressed property from your desperate sister-in-law, flip it for a massive profit within 30 days, and slide the principal right back into the accounts before the quarterly audits caught up with you. It was a classic amateur move, but you made one fatal miscalculation when you set up that fake concrete supplier front. You did not just pull money from the general operating budget. You routed those funds directly out of your father's corporate employee pension accounts. Marcus choked on a breath. He stared at Trent as if staring at a ghost. You touched a federally protected pension fund. Marcus rasped, his voice stripped of all its former bluster. You are going to federal prison. They will crucify you. I turned my attention back to Trent. My firm was retained 3 weeks ago to conduct a comprehensive forensic audit of your father's entire corporate structure. They suspected internal bleeding, but they thought it was a rogue mid-level accountant. They had no idea the thief was the CEO's own son. When I saw the irregularities in the pension disbursements, I flagged them for review. I tracked the routing numbers through the shell companies straight to the escrow account used to purchase my house. You stole retirement funds from blue-collar workers to finance a fraudulent real estate scheme. The Department of Labor and the Securities and Exchange Commission have already been notified. They are coordinating with the FBI right now. Chloe backed away from Trent, pressing her spine against the stainless steel refrigerator. Her hands shook violently as she wrapped them around her own waist. You ruined us, she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. You told me we were expanding our portfolio. You told me we were going to be richer than your father. You stole pension money. You are going to jail. What happens to me, Trent? What happens to my credit cards? What happens to my country club membership? Trent lifted his head slowly. His face was a mask of pure despair. Shut up, Chloe. He snapped, his voice low and venomous. Just shut up about your stupid credit cards. My life is over. My father is going to testify against me to save his own company. He will throw me to the wolves to keep the federal regulators from dismantling his empire. I am facing 20 years minimum. Helen rushed toward Chloe, wrapping her arms protectively around her golden child. We will hire lawyers, Helen declared, glaring at me with raw hatred. We will fight this. You will not destroy my daughter. You will not take away everything she has built. She did not build anything, Helen. I said, my voice perfectly calm. She just attached herself to a parasite, and now that the host is dying, she is going down with him. There are no lawyers who can make a federal pension embezzlement case disappear. The assets will be frozen. The accounts will be seized. The federal government will confiscate every single thing Trent bought with stolen money, including this house and everything inside it. The designer clothes, the cars, the jewelry, it is all subject to asset forfeiture. Chloe let out a gut-wrenching wail and slid down the front of the refrigerator until she was sitting on the floor, crying hysterically into her hands. Helen crouched beside her, stroking her hair, while throwing panicked glances at Marcus. Marcus, however, was not looking at his wife or his favorite daughter. He was staring at his own hands. The reality of his own ruin had fully eclipsed his concern for Trent. My logistics company, Marcus whispered mostly to himself. The bank will seize my fleet tomorrow morning. The EPA will place a lien on my personal properties. I have $50 million in commercial debt and no revenue stream. You signed the fraudulent transfer documents, Marcus, I reminded him, stepping away from the kitchen island. You facilitated the transaction that laundered stolen pension funds. The authorities will look very closely at your involvement. You are an accessory to federal embezzlement and a primary participant in environmental fraud. You and Trent can share a legal defense strategy. Trent scrambled to his feet, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained with sweat. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You set us up, Maya. You knew about the environmental damage. You knew about the audit. You orchestrated this whole thing to ruin us because you were jealous of Chloe. You always hated us. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the marble countertops. I did not force you to embezzle money, Trent. I did not force Marcus to collude in property theft. I did not forge the trust documents. You did all of that on your own. You were so greedy, so desperate to take something from me that you blindly leaped into a trap of your own making. I simply stepped aside and watched you dig your own graves. You are a monster, Chloe sobbed, pointing at me. You planned this. You let me plan my whole life around this money and then you snatched it away. You are a terrible sister. I am not a terrible sister, Chloe, I replied, my tone dropping to a cold, steady whisper. I am just the consequence of your actions. For years, this family treated me like dirt because I refused to pretend we were perfect. You stole from innocent employees to fund your fake luxury lifestyle. You tried to leave me bankrupt and homeless. The truth is out now. The authorities are closing in on your accounts. You can cry all you want, but nobody is coming to save you tonight. You are completely and utterly out of time, I promise. I watched their faces contort in synchronized horror, but I was not quite finished. I reached into the leather portfolio I had brought with me. The thick manila folder felt heavy in my hands. I unclasped the string closure and pulled out a single sheet of crisp white paper. It was not a bank statement. It was not an environmental assessment. It was something far more permanent. I laid it flat on the pristine marble countertop, right next to the fraudulent deed they had used to steal my home. Trent stared at the paper, but his eyes were too unfocused to comprehend the bold black lettering at the top of the page. Marcus, however, leaned forward. His reading glasses slipped down the bridge of his nose as he squinted at the official seal. The breath hitched in his throat. A strange gurgling sound escaped his lips as all the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. What is it? Helen demanded, grabbing her husband's arm and shaking it. Marcus, tell me what that paper says right now. Marcus could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but his vocal cords had completely paralyzed. I will read it for you, Helen. I offered, picking the document back up and holding it under the recessed lighting. This is an official submission receipt from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Specifically, it is from their white-collar crime division. This very morning at exactly 8 a.m., I uploaded a secure encrypted file directly to their tip portal. That file contained every single piece of evidence I gathered during my forensic audit of Trent's trust accounts. It included the internal routing numbers, the shell company registrations, the forged power of attorney, and the environmental hazard reports. Trent let out a sound that was half scream and half sob. You went to the FBI? He gasped, clawing at his own chest as if he were having a heart attack. Maya, you cannot do this. You have to call them back. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them it was a family dispute. I tilted my head, looking at him with absolute disdain. You do not call the FBI and tell them a $2.5 million pension embezzlement scheme is a family dispute, Trent. Federal investigators do not care about our petty domestic squabbles. They care about wire fraud. They care about money laundering. They care about corporate executives stealing from blue-collar workers. The moment I hit submit this morning, the machine started turning. There is no stopping it now. You cannot buy your way out. Your father cannot litigate your way out. By tomorrow morning, federal agents will be walking into your corporate headquarters with seizure warrants. Chloe scrambled away from Trent, as if his very presence was contagious. She pressed her back against the stainless steel refrigerator, her eyes darting frantically around the kitchen she had so proudly claimed as her own just an hour ago. He is going to prison, she shrieked, pointing a trembling manicured finger at her husband. Mom, he is going to prison and they are going to take my house. They are going to take my cars. I will have nothing. You will have exactly what you earned, Chloe, I said softly. You wanted to play the role of the ruthless socialite who steps on everyone to get what she wants. You laughed when Trent forged my name. You celebrated when you thought you had left me destitute. Now you get to experience the consequences of your own greed. Helen lunged toward me, her hands curled into claws. Her carefully maintained country club facade had completely disintegrated. You vindictive witch, she screamed, spit flying from her lips. You planned this all along. You wanted to destroy your sister because you were always jealous of her. You are sick. You are a sick and twisted person. I did not flinch as Helen stopped inches from my face. Her chest heaved with rage. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. I was never jealous of Chloe, Helen. I pitied her. You raised her to believe that money and status were the only things that mattered in this world. You taught her that empathy was a weakness and that cruelty was a strength. You created a monster who was perfectly willing to steal from her own blood to buy a walk-in closet. I did not destroy Chloe. I just let her true nature destroy itself. Marcus suddenly grabbed his chest, leaning heavily against the counter. The physical toll of the stress was breaking him down. Maya, please. He wheezed, his voice barely recognizable. The logistics company. My fleet. If the FBI investigates Trent, they will subpoena my accounts too. They will see the $300,000 wire transfer. They will see that I accepted the money. You have to tell them I did not know. You have to tell them I was tricked. I stared at the man who had supposedly raised me. The man who had thrown me out of my childhood bedroom. The man who had repeatedly told me I was a failure because I chose to work hard instead of marrying a trust fund. I cannot tell them that, Marcus. I replied smoothly, folding the document back into the manila folder. Because that would be a lie. You knew the transfer bypassed escrow. You knew the source was hidden. You signed the documents anyway because you were greedy. You chose to be an accessory. I turned my back on them and walked toward the massive front door without a single ounce of regret in my heart. The chaotic sound of Trent weeping and Helen screaming helplessly echoed behind me, filling the grand hallway. They were securely trapped in a horrific financial nightmare they intentionally built themselves. I stepped out into the crisp evening air, leaving the burning ruins of their miserable empire far behind me forever. Maya, wait. The frantic voice sliced through the cold night air before I could unlock my car. I turned slowly, gripping my briefcase. Helen stumbled down the wide brick steps, her expensive heels catching on the masonry. She looked unhinged, her perfectly coiffed hair flying wildly. Behind her, Marcus emerged, dragging his feet like a man walking to the gallows. Trent and Chloe followed, looking utterly terrified of the reality closing in. Helen threw herself onto the driveway pavement, dropping to her knees and scraping her bare legs against the concrete. She grabbed my coat, weeping. Maya, I am so sorry, she sobbed, her voice cracking. I am so sorry for everything. We were incredibly wrong. Please, you have to call them back. You have to retract the evidence. I will do anything you want. I will make Marcus sign over the company to you. Please do not send Trent to prison. Do not let them take Chloe's house. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making sure I felt worthless. I felt no triumph watching her grovel in the dirt. I felt no joy seeing the terror in her eyes. I simply felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. Get up, Helen, I said, my voice devoid of any inflection. Do not embarrass yourself any further. She refused to move, clutching my coat tighter. No, Maya, please listen to me. I know I was a terrible mother. I know I played favorites. I treated you like a scapegoat while I gave Chloe everything she wanted. I was foolish and blind. I see it now. I see how brilliant you are. I see how much we underestimated you. Please give us one more chance to be a real family. I gently pried her fingers off my coat, taking a step back. You do not want a family, Helen, I replied, my tone completely flat. You want a lifeline. You are only apologizing right now because you have run out of options. You are not sorry for how you treated me. You are only sorry that the person you spent 3 decades stepping on is the one holding the shovel while you are standing in a very deep grave. Marcus reached the bottom of the steps. He looked ancient, stripped of his arrogance and wealth. Maya, he croaked, extending a shaking hand toward me. You are my daughter. You share my blood. You cannot walk away and let the federal government destroy your own flesh and blood. We built this legacy together. We can fix this together. I met his gaze, feeling nothing. You do not have a legacy, Marcus. You have a criminal enterprise built on theft. You spent my childhood telling me I was a disappointment because I wanted to earn my success instead of inheriting it. You mocked my career. You belittled my education. You told everyone Chloe was the success story because she married a wealthy man. You never wanted a daughter who worked hard. You wanted an accessory who fit your corporate image. When I refused to play the part, you discarded me. Trent pushed his way past Marcus, his face pale and slick with sweat. Maya, I will pay it back. I will liquidate everything. I will return the pension funds tomorrow morning. Call the investigators and tell them it was an accounting error. Tell them you made a mistake. You stole retirement funds from elderly people who trusted you. Trent, I said coldly. You embezzled millions of dollars from hard-working employees to buy a house you did not earn. You thought you were untouchable because of your father's money. You thought the rules did not apply to you. You thought you could defraud me, manipulate your way into a quick payout, and walk away without a single consequence. Your greed blinded you to your own incompetence. You dug this grave with your own entitlement and arrogance. Now, you must lie in it. Chloe stepped forward, wrapping her arms around herself. She looked at me with red, puffy eyes. Maya, please, she begged. We are sisters. We shared a room. We grew up together. You cannot do this to me. We shared a room, Chloe, but we were never sisters. Sisters protect each other. You spent our entire lives trying to humiliate me. You conspired with your husband to buy my house out from under me when you thought I was bankrupt. You laughed at the thought of me losing everything. You wanted me to be homeless just so you could feel superior. I did not do this to you, Chloe. You did this to yourself. You chose money over your own sister. Now you have neither. Helen let out another agonizing wail, burying her face in her hands. Marcus stared at the ground, completely paralyzed by the reality of his impending incarceration. Trent stood shaking violently, unable to speak. I turned around and unlocked my car door. I paused, looking back at the four of them. You spent my entire life telling me I did not belong in this family, I said, my voice carrying. You were absolutely right. I do not belong with you. I never did. This is the last time you will ever see me. I am officially severing all ties with every single one of you. Do not call me. Do not look for me. When the federal agents arrive tomorrow, do not say my name. You wanted a life built on lies and deceit. Now you get to pay the final bill. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The headlights illuminated their broken, terrified faces one last time. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pulled away, watching them fade into the darkness through my rearview mirror. I drove down the winding suburban streets, leaving their toxic world behind. The silence inside my car felt incredibly peaceful. For the first time in my life, I was completely and unequivocally free. The peaceful silence was suddenly pierced by a sharp, wailing sound in the distance. I eased my foot off the accelerator and pulled my car over to the shoulder of the road just beyond the imposing iron gates of their sprawling estate. I rolled down my window, letting the cool night air rush inside as the faint noise rapidly grew into a deafening roar. Red and blue lights began to slice through the darkness, painting the manicured trees and expensive landscaping in harsh, frantic colors. I watched through my rearview mirror as a convoy of marked police cruisers and sleek black, unmarked SUVs swarmed the neighborhood. They did not slow down to admire the architecture. They tore right through the open gates of the property, stopping violently on the circular cobblestone driveway I had just abandoned. Doors flew open, and men wearing dark windbreakers with bold yellow lettering across their backs poured out. Federal agents. The wheels of justice had turned even faster than I had anticipated. I stepped out of my car and stood in the shadows of the large oak trees, clutching the heavy manila folder to my chest. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the grand entrance. The agents did not bother knocking politely. They swarmed the wide brick steps, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, and banged on the heavy mahogany double doors with absolute authority. Helen opened the door, her face pale and contorted with fresh terror. She tried to block their path, raising her hands and shouting something about calling her lawyers, but the agent simply pushed past her, sweeping into the grand foyer like a tidal wave. The sheer physical presence of law enforcement shattered the last remaining illusion of their untouchable wealth and status. This was not a polite corporate inquiry. This was a criminal raid. Minutes later, the front doors burst open again. Marcus was the first one brought out. The proud, arrogant patriarch of the family was completely unrecognizable. His hands were bound tightly behind his back in heavy steel handcuffs. His expensive tailored suit jacket hung off his slumped shoulders, and his face was buried in his chest. He stumbled down the brick steps guided by two stern federal agents. The man who had spent his entire life measuring human worth by bank account balances and corporate titles was now publicly paraded as a common criminal. He looked broken, defeated, and entirely pathetic. His legacy was completely gone, replaced by the harsh reality of federal fraud charges. The agents guided him toward the back of an unmarked vehicle, pushing his head down as they shoved him into the back seat. Then came Trent. Unlike Marcus, who suffered his humiliation in absolute silence, Trent was a chaotic mess of cowardice. He was sobbing hysterically, dragging his feet and pleading wildly with the agents dragging him out the door. He shouted that he was framed, that he had money, that his father was a billionaire who would fix everything. The agents ignored his frantic babbling, treating him with the cold, clinical efficiency reserved for white-collar criminals who suddenly realize their privilege cannot buy their freedom. Trent tripped over his own expensive shoes and fell onto the pavement, scraping his knees. He looked up at the flashing lights, his face slick with sweat and tears. He was facing a massive federal embezzlement sentence, and the absolute terror in his eyes confirmed that the reality had finally crushed his fragile ego. They hauled him up roughly and tossed him into the back of a police cruiser, slamming the heavy door shut and cutting off his pathetic cries for mercy. Chloe stood frozen on the front porch, shivering in the cold night air. Her designer clothes looked ridiculous against the backdrop of flashing police lights and federal raid jackets. She had no husband. She had no upcoming luxury vacation to Bali. She had no stolen pension money to fund her extravagant shopping sprees. The stolen funds were frozen, and her entire fake empire had evaporated into thin air. She wrapped her arms around her waist, staring blankly at the police cruiser holding her husband. She had built her entire personality around being superior to everyone else, around looking down on me and mocking my hard work. Now she was completely destitute, facing a lifetime of public humiliation and financial ruin. Helen stood beside her, weeping loudly into her hands, mourning the absolute destruction of their perfect social image. They were left with absolutely nothing. I looked down at the manila folder in my hands. The heavy paper contained the truth, the undeniable proof of my own hard work, and the evidence that had finally brought these toxic people to justice. I did not feel a sudden rush of vindictive joy. I did not feel the need to march up to the driveway and gloat over their destruction. I felt a profound sense of closure. The heavy, suffocating weight that had pressed down on my shoulders for decades was permanently gone. I had survived their abuse, their mockery, and their malicious attempts to destroy my life. I had turned the tables using nothing but my own intelligence and absolute dedication to the truth. I closed the folder and walked back to my car, feeling the cool night breeze against my face. I placed the folder securely on the passenger seat and slid behind the steering wheel. I put the car in drive and slowly pulled away from the curb, leaving the blinding flashing lights, the desperate screaming, and the absolute ruins of their pathetic lives in my rearview mirror. I rolled the windows down, letting the crisp autumn breeze clear the lingering stench of their corruption out of my lungs. The dark suburban road stretching out ahead of me was wide open and completely clear. I was moving toward a beautiful, peaceful future, built entirely on my own merits, totally free from their shadow, and finally, undeniably, truly incredibly victorious. Watching the absolute destruction of an empire built on entitlement reveals a profound truth about human nature, ambition, and consequence. The dramatic downfall of Trent, Chloe, and Marcus clearly demonstrates that wealth and status, when entirely disconnected from basic integrity, are incredibly fragile illusions. They constructed their extravagant lives on a foundation of deceit, genuinely believing their immense privilege granted them permanent immunity from reality. They viewed manipulation as a valid business strategy and empathy as a fatal weakness. However, their unchecked arrogance ultimately became their most fatal vulnerability. The core lesson embedded in the story is that true security cannot be stolen, married into, or embezzled. It must be methodically, quietly, and honestly earned. Maya's journey perfectly illustrates this exact principle. Stripped of familial support, Constantly belittled and targeted by malicious greed, she easily could have crumbled under the immense pressure. Instead, she weaponized the undeniable truth. Her forensic audit was not just a brilliant professional maneuver, it was a testament to the undeniable power of absolute self-reliance. She survived a profoundly toxic, narcissistic family dynamic by cultivating her own high-value skills, maintaining an unwavering moral compass, and strictly refusing to participate in their shared delusions of grandeur. Integrity is the ultimate, unbreakable safety net. A life constructed through shortcuts, fraud, and the exploitation of others is nothing more than a house of cards waiting for the wind to blow. Authentic independence provides an impenetrable shield against toxic environments and manipulative individuals. Maya walked away completely free and victorious, not because she was vindictive, but because she stood firmly rooted in reality, while everyone else was finally drowning in their own lies. Share your thoughts below on how you cultivate authentic independence in your own life, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice.